"Ma'am, please, someone help her." The words came out before he even realized he'd spoken. His hands were already moving, already reaching. Nobody turned around. He was the only one who stopped. He didn't know her name, didn't know what stopping would cost him, didn't know that 72 hours later, a man in a dark suit would be standing at his door with an envelope thick enough to change the shape of his entire life. But before that Tuesday afternoon, before the parking lot, before the choice that split everything into before and after, let me tell you who this man was. His name was Gideon Earl Pruitt, 63 years old, retired school custodian, widower, lived alone in a 2-bedroom house on Sycamore Terrace in Millhaven, Ohio, a neighborhood that used to have a hardware store, a diner, and a barber shop on the same block. Now it had a payday loan place, a shuttered diner, and a vape shop with bars on the windows. Gideon was a big man, 6'2", broad across the shoulders, hands that looked like they could palm a basketball, even though his knees hadn't let him play since 2009. He had a gray beard he kept trimmed, reading glasses he kept losing, and a laugh that could fill a room. People who knew him knew that laugh. People who didn't know him saw the size, the worn jacket, the work boots that had seen better years, and they made a different calculation. That calculation happened constantly. At the grocery store, where cashiers watched his hands when he reached into his pocket. At the bank, where the security guard followed him twice to the counter before recognizing him. At the VA clinic, where the receptionist asked to see his ID 3 times in 4 visits, even though his name was right there in the system, Gideon noticed. He always noticed. He just didn't say anything about it. What people who made that calculation didn't know was this. For 31 years, Gideon Earl Pruitt had been the first person in Millhaven Middle School every morning. 5:15 a.m. keys on his belt. He mopped hallways before the teachers arrived, fixed the leaky drinking fountain in the East Wing 14 times before the district finally replaced the pipe, and kept a stash of granola bars in his supply closet for kids who came in hungry, which was more kids than anyone at the administrative level wanted to acknowledge. His wife, Lorraine, had been an LPN at Millhaven General for 26 years. She'd died of a stroke 18 months ago, a Tuesday in March. While he was at the grocery store picking up the orange juice she liked, he made it back in time, just barely. After Lorraine, the house got quiet in a way Gideon didn't have words for. He kept her reading chair in the living room, kept her mug on the second hook by the coffee pot. Some habits aren't things you break. They're things you carry. He had a daughter, Renee, who lived in Columbus with her husband and 2 kids. She called every Sunday. She worried. He told her not to. She did anyway. He had a vegetable garden in the backyard that Lorraine had started, and he'd kept going out of stubbornness or love or something that sat between the two. He had a neighbor named Pete who borrowed his ratchet set 3 years ago and never returned it. He had a truck that needed new brake pads and a doctor who kept telling him his blood pressure was watching him like a hawk. He was not a man with a lot of margin, but he was a man with a particular kind of steadiness, the kind that comes not from never being knocked down, but from being knocked down enough times that you stop waiting for the ground to feel different. You just get up because that's what you do. Tuesday, October. The kind of afternoon where the sky can't decide if it wants to be fall or winter, and compromises by being both gray and cutting, the wind with an edge. Gideon was at the Millhaven Community Center parking lot. He volunteered there on Tuesdays, ran a small repair clinic in the gymnasium, helping residents fix small appliances, furniture, things that were easier to throw away than to fix, if you didn't know someone who knew how. He knew how. Had known how since he was 12 years old, watching his father rebuild a lawnmower engine on a Saturday afternoon. He was walking back to his truck, toolbox in his right hand, collar up against the wind. The parking lot was half full. A farmer's market had wrapped up on the far end. People were packing up, loading cars, heads down against the cold. That's when he saw her. She was on the ground between 2 parked cars, not sitting, not crouching. On the ground, one arm up against the bumper of a blue sedan, the other pressed flat against the asphalt, like she was trying to push herself up, and her body wasn't cooperating. A canvas grocery bag had tipped over beside her. An apple had rolled out. Nobody had picked it up. She was a small woman, slight white hair pulled back, in her late 70s at least. Dark wool coat. Practical shoes. The kind of woman who had been doing everything herself for a very long time. 3 people walked past her in the time it took Gideon to cross the lot. One glanced and kept moving. One stepped around her bag without breaking stride. One woman in a puffy vest looked, hesitated, and then redirected toward the community center doors. Gideon was already moving. "Ma'am." He set his toolbox down, crouched beside her, not grabbing, not rushing, just getting low enough that she didn't have to look up to see him. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Her eyes found his. Gray eyes, sharp even through the pain. "I twisted it," she said. "My ankle. I stepped off the curb wrong. I'm fine, or I will be." She did not look fine. Her face had gone the particular pale that pain makes, and her jaw was tight. But there was something in her voice that had been in charge of rooms before. "Can I help you up?" "I can get my truck, it's right there. I can drive you inside or wherever you need to be." She looked at him for a moment, long, measuring. The way people look at someone when they're trying to figure out the catch. "There's no catch," Gideon said. He hadn't meant to say it out loud. Something in her expression made him. She almost smiled. "All right, if you don't mind." He got her up carefully, one arm steady, letting her set the pace. She got her weight on the good foot, winced once quietly, picked up her own bag before he could. "I can carry that." "I'm sure you can." She held on to it. "But thank you." He brought his truck around. She got in with the kind of controlled difficulty that people have when they've been independent long enough that asking for help feels like losing something. She kept her coat straight, her bag on her lap, her posture upright even with a swelling ankle. He drove her to the community center entrance. The parking was closer there. She didn't ask him to come in. He didn't ask if she wanted him to. He just parked and walked in with her, one careful step at a time across the pavement, in case the ankle went again. Inside, a woman at the front desk looked up. "Vera." "Oh, Mrs. Alderman. What happened?" The woman, Mrs. Alderman, said, "Twisted my ankle in the lot. I'm fine. Get me some ice and call Malcolm and tell him I'm going to be 20 minutes late." "Yes, ma'am." She turned to Gideon. "Thank you." She said it the way people say things when they mean them completely and don't need to decorate it. "Happy to help. You need anything else?" She looked at him again with those gray eyes. "No. But, what's your name?" "Gideon. Gideon Pruitt." She extended her hand. "Nora Alderman." He shook it. Her grip was firm, the grip of someone who had shaken a lot of hands in a lot of rooms. He drove home, made himself dinner. Chicken thighs, rice, frozen green beans because the garden was done for the season. Watched the news, went to bed. He did not think about Nora Alderman or the apple on the parking lot asphalt or the 3 people who'd kept walking. He thought about whether the brake pads could wait another month and whether Renee's youngest was over her ear infection, and what he was going to do with the rest of the butternut squash in the back room. He slept fine. He usually slept fine. What he didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was that while he was sleeping, 3 phone calls were being made about him. The first was from Nora Alderman to a woman named Sandra, who was her personal assistant, and had been for 11 years. Nora described the parking lot, described Gideon, described the way he'd crouched down to her level so she didn't have to look up, described the 3 people who'd walked past. "Find out who he is," she said. "Not for anything. I just want to know." The second call Sandra made was to the Millhaven Community Center, where the coordinator told her about the repair clinic Gideon ran on Tuesdays, had been running for 4 years, no pay, just shows up with his toolbox. He fixed the community center's industrial fan last spring when they had no budget for it. "He's become a staple," the coordinator said. The third call Sandra made was to a woman named Pastor Doreen Childs at Calvary Baptist on 5th Street, who had known Gideon Pruitt for 20 years. That call lasted 40 minutes. When it was over, Sandra sat very still for a moment, then called Nora back. "You're going to want to hear this," she said. Gideon found out about none of this until Thursday morning. When someone knocked on his door at 9 a.m., he'd been in the backyard, draining the last of the garden hoses before the first hard freeze. He heard the knock through the back door, came around the side of the house, and found a man on his front porch. Tall, trim, gray at the temples, dark blazer. A black Lincoln Navigator sat at his curb, engine off. Waiting. Mr. Pruitt? Yeah. My name is Malcolm Reeves. I work for Nora Alderman. She'd like to speak with you, if you're willing. She's asked me to bring you to her office. Gideon looked at the man, looked at the car, looked back at the man. She okay? The ankle? Much better. She's at work. She's very rarely not at work. He said it without judgment, almost fond. She wanted me to tell you it's not an emergency, and there's no obligation, but she'd consider it a personal favor if you'd come. Gideon looked down at himself. He had garden dirt on his hands, and a flannel shirt he'd been wearing since 6 a.m. Give me 5 minutes. He washed up, changed his shirt, told himself this was probably nothing. Probably just a thank you. Probably a gift card, or something that he'd politely decline and be home by noon. Malcolm drove across Millhaven, through downtown, past the courthouse and the hospital, and then past them, into a part of the city where the buildings changed character, older, taller, stone facades, with brass fixtures and absolutely no signage visible from the street, because if you needed signage to find it, you probably weren't supposed to be there. They pulled into an underground garage beneath a building that took up most of a city block. Malcolm led him into an elevator, to the 14th floor, into a reception area with 14-foot ceilings and a receptionist who said, "Mr. Pruitt, go right in. She's ready for you." The office was big, not showy. Books on shelves that looked like they'd been read. A desk with real work on it. A window facing the river. And behind it, Nora Alderman, ankle-wrapped and propped on a footstool she'd clearly had to be convinced to use, in a blazer the color of slate, reading glasses on, reading something she finished before she looked up. She stood when he came in, offered her hand, took the footstool without ceremony. "Sit down, Mr. Pruitt." He sat in a leather chair across from her and told himself to pay attention. "How's the ankle?" "Usable." She said it like a performance review. She folded her hands on the desk. "I have some questions for you if that's all right, and then I have something to say." "I'll do the questions first." He nodded. "You ran a free repair clinic at the community center for 4 years. "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" Gideon considered that. People come in with a lamp or a chair or a radio they can't afford to replace. Usually it's something simple. A wire, a hinge, a 30-cent part. Feels like a waste to throw something away when it just needs 10 minutes. She looked at him over the glasses. "But you're not paid." "No." "Why not?" "Because nobody asked me to be." He paused. "And because I can. So." She was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone who is listening to more than the words. "You fixed the community center's industrial fan last spring. It was overheating. Bad capacitor. They had it sitting in the hallway waiting for a repair estimate. I had the part in my truck." "Do you always have parts in your truck?" He almost smiled. "I try to stay prepared." She looked down at something on her desk. "Pastor Childs tells me that when the Calvary Baptist Food Pantry's walk-in cooler broke down in July 2021, you spent 2 full days fixing it and refused any payment. I know how to work a refrigerant system. It needed doing." She also told me about your wife. He was quiet. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it. He could tell. He nodded once. She took off the reading glasses, set them on the desk. When she spoke again, her voice was still professional, still precise, but something underneath it had shifted slightly, the way water changes color when the light changes above it. "Mr. Pruitt, in the parking lot Tuesday, 3 people walked past me on the ground. I counted. I had time to count." She paused. "One of them was a man I recognize from our building. He works 2 floors down. He looked right at me and adjusted his path so he wouldn't have to walk close." Gideon said nothing. "You came across a full parking lot." She said it simply. Not like an accusation, not like a compliment. Just a fact she was placing on the table. "You looked like you needed help." "I did." She said it simply too. "I've run this company for 38 years. I have made acquisitions that reshaped real estate markets in 4 states. I have sat across from people who wanted things from me every single day for 38 years, and I am. She said the next word without vanity. Good at reading people. She looked at him evenly. You weren't calculating anything. You just came over. Gideon shifted in the chair. It's what you do when somebody's on the ground. Not for everyone, apparently. He didn't have an answer to that. He didn't think one was required. She stood up. Not easily, but deliberately, the ankle cooperating if not enthusiastically. She walked to the window and looked at the river for a moment. I'm going to tell you something I don't usually say to people I've known for 72 hours, she said. Last year, Alderman Properties completed a survey of the Millhaven South Corridor. Sycamore Terrace, 4th through 9th Street, the commercial blocks around the community center, his street. He kept his face still. We've been trying to figure out what that neighborhood needs, not what looks good on a development prospectus, what it actually needs. She turned from the window. I've had consultants, reports. 3 different proposals. None of them felt right, and I couldn't tell you exactly why until 2 days ago. She came back to the desk. Stayed standing. What they all had in common, she said, was that none of them started from the neighborhood. They all started from the outside and tried to go in. She looked at him directly. You've lived on Sycamore Terrace for how long? 31 years. And you know that neighborhood. I know the people in it. That's what I mean. She said it like he'd confirmed something. That's exactly what I mean. He was very still. I'm not here to offer you charity, Mr. Pruitt. I want to be clear about that. What I'm proposing is a partnership. Alderman Properties has been planning a community development initiative in the South Corridor, affordable housing rehab, small business incubation, workforce training. We have the capital. We have the architecture team. We have the contractors. She paused. What I don't have is someone who knows what that corner of this city actually is. Not what it used to be. Not what a spreadsheet says it could be. What it is right now, today, and what the people in it actually need. Gideon hadn't moved. I want to hire you as a community liaison and development consultant. Full salary. Benefits. A budget for outreach programming. You would be the connection between this company and the residents we're building for. Attending planning meetings, reporting back, flagging what works and what doesn't, and helping design the workforce training component in particular. She looked at the toolbox calloused hands on his knees. Because a man who fixes things for free for 4 years and stocks 30-cent parts in his truck knows something about workforce training that no consultant I've hired has known. The river was silver out the window behind her. The city spread out flat and quiet under an October sky. Gideon said, "What about the repair clinic?" She blinked once. "What about it?" "I run it Tuesdays. I'd want to keep running it." She almost smiled. "Build it into your schedule. We'll give you a room in the community development office if the gymnasium stops working out." He looked at her for a long moment. "You don't know me," he said. "Not really. Malcolm made some calls. That's not the same as knowing. You're right." She sat back down, the ankle getting a vote. "But here's what I know. I know you came across a parking lot when nobody else did. I know you've fixed the same community center fan, the same church cooler, the same kitchen appliances, for the same people in the same neighborhood for years. And you didn't build a brand around it. You just did it." She paused. "The person I want in this role can't be someone who does good things because they want something. It has to be someone who does good things because they don't know how to do it the other way. That person is harder to find than you might think." He sat with that. Sat with it the way a man sits with something too large to pick up immediately. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Please, what were you doing in that parking lot?" He said it carefully. Not challenging, genuinely asking. "A woman like you, why were you at the community center?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "One of my granddaughters takes a dance class there. Wednesday evenings. I like to watch through the window. I don't usually go in. She doesn't know I come. She's 8. She gets self-conscious. But I like to watch." Something crossed her face. Private, quick. The face of a woman who built an empire and still drives across town to watch an 8-year-old in a leotard through a window. Gideon said, "She any good?" Nora Alderman, who in 38 years had walked out of rooms without answering harder questions from harder people, laughed. "Completely terrible," she said. "She commits to it completely, and she has no natural gift whatsoever. It's wonderful to watch." He laughed too, the laugh that could fill a room. She looked at him and the smile stayed in her eyes a moment after it left her face. "I need an answer," she said. "Not today if you need time. But I do need an answer." He thought about Sycamore Terrace, about the closed diner and the payday loan place and the hardware store that used to be there, about the community center coordinator who had no budget and too much need, about Pastor Doreen Childs and the walk-in cooler and the 12 families that fed on Thursdays, about Lorraine, who had spent 26 years in a hospital 2 miles from where they lived, and who had cared fiercely, specifically, personally, about the health of the people in that specific zip code, and who had believed, right up until the end, that the most important work happened in the place where you actually lived. He thought about the apple on the parking lot asphalt, the woman on the ground, the 3 people who'd kept walking. He thought about what his father had said once, watching him over the lawnmower engine. "Anyone can walk past a problem. Takes a particular kind of person to stop and look at it long enough to figure out what's wrong," he said. "I'll need to talk to my daughter, of course, and I want to see the plans. The actual plans, not a brochure." She pulled a folder from her desk and put it in front of him. He looked at it, looked at her, took it. "You've already got this ready. Sandra works quickly." He tucked the folder under his arm and stood up. He called Renee from the parking garage. She picked up on the second ring, he told her. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "Daddy." Her voice cracked on the word. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious," she said. "Mom would have had something to say about this." He said, "Yeah, she would have had a lot to say about it." He could hear Renee smiling through the phone. He drove himself home. Malcolm had offered the car. Gideon had said no thank you. He knew the way. He stopped at the community center on the way back. The coordinator was in her office, and he knocked on the doorframe. She looked up. "Hey, Gideon." "Clinic's not until Tuesday, I know," he said. "I just wanted to ask you something. If you had more space here, more consistent funding, what would you do with it?" She put down her pen. She looked at him like she was afraid this was a joke. Then she told him. She talked for 22 minutes without stopping. He listened to every word. That was October. By March, the South Corridor project had a name, a community advisory board, and a groundbreaking ceremony that Pastor Doreen Childs blessed with a prayer that went 11 minutes and felt like 6. The diner block on 5th Street broke ground first, a mixed-use building, ground floor commercial with intentional space held for a locally owned business incubator, upper floors affordable residential. The community center got a dedicated repair and trades training lab in the East Wing, new equipment, proper ventilation, a sink with hot water, and a part storage system that Gideon designed himself, and that the coordinator described as honestly a little obsessive in the best way. The repair clinic moved into the new space on a Tuesday in April. Same time, same deal, free, open to anyone who walked in with something broken. Except now there were 2 long tables instead of 1, and a utility shelf stocked the way Gideon's truck used to be, with parts and tools for most of the things that most people in most households needed to fix most often. The first week, 11 people came. The third week, 24. By week 8, there was a waiting list and a teenager named Devin who had started showing up an hour early every Tuesday to set up and then to fix things himself, with Gideon standing at his shoulder asking questions instead of giving answers. Malcolm came to observe one afternoon in May. He stood at the door of the new lab and watched for 40 minutes. Gideon saw him, nodded, kept working. Afterward, Malcolm said, "She's going to want a report." "Tell her it's working," Gideon said. "That's all." "That and the kid fixed a toaster today. First try." Gideon said it the way you say something that matters without saying that it matters. Malcolm looked at the teenager, who was already on to a table lamp, tongue between his teeth in concentration. He nodded once, drove back and told Nora. She visited herself the following Tuesday, came in with no announcement, sat in the corner on a folding chair with the ankle, which had healed but liked to remind her of itself in certain weather. She watched, didn't say anything, left after an hour. She called Gideon that evening. "The kid with the lamp," she said. "Devon. Yeah, get me his story. I want to know what he's going to need in 2 years." Gideon smiled into the phone. "I've already asked him." "Good." She paused. "You're very irritating to try to stay ahead of." He laughed. The laugh that fills a room, even through a phone. "Thank you, ma'am." She made a sound that was possibly a laugh and hung up. In the hallway of the new Community Development Office on Millhaven's south side, there are 2 things on the wall. A photograph of the Sycamore Terrace block, taken in 2019, before the diner closed. Lorraine Pruitt is visible through the diner window, just her elbow and the side of her face, a coincidence nobody caught until Renee pointed it out. "It's her," she said quietly, looking at the framed photograph on the day of the opening. "Isn't it?" Gideon looked, said nothing, reached up and touched the edge of the frame with 2 fingers. Next to it, a canvas grocery bag. Worn at the handles, a small tear near the bottom seam. Below it, a small brass plate, no explanation. Just a date. The Tuesday in October. You don't need to know the whole story to feel it. Some things explain themselves. I keep thinking about that parking lot. About the 3 people who adjusted their paths and kept going. About the fact that some of them probably told themselves a story. She's fine. Someone else will help. I just make it awkward. We all know that voice. Most of us have listened to it at least once. And then there's Gideon. A man who was tired. A man whose knees hurt and whose truck needed brake pads. And whose house was very quiet in a way that had no good solution. A man who had every reason to keep walking, and not one piece of evidence that stopping would lead anywhere except to a harder afternoon than he'd planned. He stopped because someone was on the ground. That's it. That's the whole calculation. I don't think Gideon Earl Pruitt is extraordinary because of what happened after. I think he's extraordinary because of what happened before the after. Before the office and the contract and the groundbreaking. In the parking lot. When the wind was cold and 3 other people kept walking, and he didn't know who she was, and it didn't matter because she was on the ground and his hands were already moving. That's the thing about real character. It doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need a reward. It doesn't even need a reason except the one in front of you. I want to ask you something honestly. When was the last time you stopped? Not because you knew it would lead somewhere. Not because anyone was watching. Just because someone needed it and your hands were free. Drop that in the comments. Tell me your story. Because stories like this don't live in one person. They live in the people who recognize them. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to be reminded what one moment can become. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. And the next time the wind is cold and somebody's on the ground, you already know what to do.